Lammy, we're going to talk today about tutorials. I'm really excited about that. But before we do, you've been playing a game, and apparently you're kind of addicted to this game. What is it, and why is it so addictive, and why do you want to talk about it? If you do want to talk about it, I guess I'm just assuming.
Well, last time we talked, I brought up Cult of the Lamb, which at the time hadn't been released, since released. And I mean, it's only been, I think I started playing it last night, so it hasn't been that long. But I haven't been playing video games almost at all this year, not very much. I've been watching a little bit and playing a tiny bit, but I haven't really given myself the time to sink into a game much this year. And this game wasn't on my radar at all. Only popped up, a couple weeks ago, and maybe not even that long, like about a week ago for me. And immediately, I think anybody that pops up in this game immediately understands why it has such a hook, because it starts off with beautiful art design and great music, and that alone, usually, especially for me, we talked about how immersion in terms of just having a very clear art direction that's very specific and not necessarily trying to be realistic really grabs me. That's for sure an instant thing. We've also talked before about how Disco Elysium, the second it starts with that low rumbling speech that happens the second you boot up the game, uh, grabbed me. Like 5 seconds in, I knew this game was going to be special, and Cult of the Lamb had a similar thing. Just with the direction it went, it grabbed me. And then, as I mentioned last time, it's got a bit of everything. It's a bit of a roguelike, but it's also kind of a city builder, colony sim, bit of Animal Crossing thrown in there. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm enjoying it. And we'll see if it negatively impacts any of the other responsibilities I have.
So this is such an interesting chance to talk about a game where you're just beginning in the game. You're just starting to get a feel for it. It's such a fertile time, like when you're learning the systems. There's many, I guess, stages of stages of grief when you leave a game, but stages of wonder and fulfillment when you get into something. And usually you and I talk about games in the past tense, something that we played a lot of, something that one of us can talk about after some introspection and retrospection as well. But for this, you're right in the middle of it. So what's the core loop for you? Like what do you do over and over and over again in this game more than anything else? It sounds like it's a mix of genres here, but what's the main thing that you're doing?
Honestly, in many ways, I mean, you've played City Builders. I don't know if you've played a lot of Colony Sims. You did play Frostpunk, I think. Um, and all those games, you're having to manage a lot of different things. Like it's always like you're juggling a lot of balls in the air, and you never have it perfectly balanced, right? You never have a perfect system where if you do the same loop over and over, everything will be all right. You kind of have to constantly switch your focus to maintain all of the levels sort of where they need to be, to maintain all the balls in the air. And so actually this game doesn't have a single loop. It's got a few different loops. The roguelike and the dungeon crawling element. So there's a dungeon that will progress the main storyline. So doing the dungeons and getting through them is the way that you actually get, from what I can tell, through the story. But it's also the way that you gain certain resources that you need to maintain your colony. So, for example, at the beginning of the game, you spend quite a bit of time doing dungeon crawling because you don't have a lot of people in your cult. You don't have a lot of people in your flock. And so you're just going out to essentially, preach to more potential cult followers and gather some resources. But today I spent like 2 hours straight just doing colony sim, like just talking to all of my cult members. I had a dissenter that I was trying to re-educate every day, and it was taking so long, and I didn't want to leave him there because the longer you leave him alone, the more he dissents, and then he'll leave and he spreads lies to all my other cult followers. Really bad first cult follower I had there. And so the loop, for 2 hours today was the day loop of a kind of colony and city builder sim where, okay, now that it's a new day, I'm allowed to do all these actions again. So I go make sure I can do them all and try to achieve a tiny bit more than I did yesterday, and, build a few more buildings and make sure everybody's fed and all those kinds of things. Whereas the night before, I'd been doing a lot of dungeon crawling and just collecting resources. So it's a really interesting example of, that's why I would say the loop is juggling balls in the air, trying to make sure that every single, let's say, resource is properly maintained at the level that it should be to keep the game going, and so that you don't lose. And I don't really know what losing is like for this game. I've died in the dungeon, but being that it's a roguelike, mostly what happens then is, your cult followers lose faith in you because you've failed in your mission. But I don't know what the sort of ending might be if the colony decides and the cult decides to truly turn against me. So far, I haven't experienced that.
So something that you seek in almost every playthrough of a game is discovery, exploration. What are you discovering when you play this game? And it might be two different things. It might be a different thing in the dungeon than in the colony sim city builder. But yeah, where's the discovery?
It's kind of all over. I would say this has discovery in many similar ways to other roguelikes that I like, which is that it's really like new enemy types. That's discovery, with new patterns, new weapons or abilities that you can use. On the colony side, and a lot like Frostpunk, you can have like commandments, make decrees. And so even just discovering, I don't know any of them yet. You literally collect them. So it's a bit of a collectathon. There's also, in the Animal Crossing sort of colony sim style, there's a bunch of decorations and buildings. So you're constantly discovering. You don't know what any of them are. And then on the QC side too, the cult followers, actually, they're all different animals. So it's called Cult of the Lamb, your little lamb. But all of your other cult followers are other animals. And you don't actually know what they're all going to be like. Like, you also collect and discover what those are going to be like, plus all the different dungeons. Like, it's every little piece. It's just unlocking. You don't know yet, what the bounds are of the game. And there's a lot of mechanics. So if we're talking about tutorials, the way that they tried to drip feed you different mechanics, because there's a lot to keep track of, is quite a feat. I really do wonder what the staying power of this game will be. And I'm a little curious to see how they juggle all the balls as developers of having such a complicated game with so many different mechanics that maybe not everyone's into, and how people might balance their play style with the game.
So remind me, was Cult of the Lamb in early access at all?
I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of. It's been fully released now. Um, I bought it on Nintendo Switch just because I'm about to go away on a trip soon, and I thought it might be good for the airplane. But yeah, it's fully released on all the platforms that I think it's been announced for. And I didn't see a way to play early access on Steam before it released. So maybe they would have had some sort of beta, but not the normal early access release.
Okay, the reason I ask is because something I've never done that I can remember is play a game right when it's new, right when it's released. I've always come late to a game, and it feels like a lot of the terrain has been explored, so I just have to keep off of the internet until I have a question I just can't get the answer to, and then I Google it, and then there's 1,000 answers, and there we go. And usually I can find it. But for you at this moment, you're kind of wading into the dark with however many other people are playing this game at the same time. Is there an excitement to that? Is there a sense of almost pioneering to that? Or does it feel a little bit like, if I get too far in, I've got no rope to pull out to ask, a question of like, how do I save this situation or something?
I think it's exciting. I like getting wrapped up in hype. Um, I think I wouldn't have played this game if it didn't seem to explode on Twitch all of a sudden. So like, everyone's playing it, like, and people I wouldn't normally think of. So streamers that are League of Legends streamers, I saw playing this game the day it came out and loving it, like just getting into it and being like, wow, this game is awesome. And sometimes those big, huge hype trains, let's say, that my instant and like internal skeptic and cynic, that's where I go, oh, I hope it doesn't, like, the bubble doesn't just burst and everybody gets too excited. And especially, we've talked about this before, that in games like this, I tend to grow too fast and wear myself out, like bore myself. I make the game such a chore. I with city builders and all of these kinds where there's like, you want to grow. I grow so fast that the game becomes boring. And I hope that that doesn't happen like on the global scale, because I like to keep interested in a game, as we've talked before, through the social aspect. This is a single player game, but even with single player games, being around a community of people and watching other people play and seeing those discoveries on other people's streams is part of the fun. So also, I don't find myself in games of today. They're not usually so hard that you ever really get stuck. So that fear of, oh no, like what happens if, I'm not that worried about it. Usually my early adopter fear is just, it's still buggy, and it is still buggy. Like there's just some visual bugs, some hitches, nothing, I haven't hit anything major yet. But clearly, for people that are going to play it, who knows, in a year, it might not have those issues.
Interesting. Yeah, it sounds like something. It sounds like something that I'd like to play, and I'm not afraid of trudging out into the dark and discovering a game anew. I actually like the feeling of making it new for me, and so I'll play a game that's 20 years old and try to really feel my way through, and discover it as the developer intended me to discover this game and discover the elements of it and be surprised by things. Speaking of which, have there been any surprises for you? Anything that you don't have to give anything away, you don't have to give any spoilers here, but anything that surprised you, threw you for a loop, made you think about it differently?
So far, one of the things I'll say, and maybe we can take this conversation slowly back into tutorials, is that this game does seem to rely fairly heavily on, sort of cliches and gamer experience. So in terms of mechanics, there's a lot of learned experience that I've had that I instantly applied. Like I didn't really have to follow tutorials very carefully, because it's like, oh, okay, this is like Frostpunk's, like you can make commandments and you have to choose which ones, and that's like this. I have to talk to my, I almost call them villagers every day, just like in Animal Crossing, cult followers, just like in Animal Crossing, to make them happy. Oh, like I'm taking pieces of what I've learned from other games and applying it. And the story also seems to follow what is kind of a tongue-in-cheek, okay, like, oh yeah, you're running a cult. So there's a lot of obvious cliches wrapped up in that. And I don't know yet what the big surprises in the story will be, because I've just started. But already, they're saying like, oh, you shouldn't trust so and so. And it's like, well, duh. Like, there's some of that story wise, they're maybe trying to make it seem like a surprise. But also, a lot of it is randomly generated from what I can tell. So, for example, you have dissenters in your colony, in your cult. I think a lot of that is just rolled by chance. There are some, I think, events that are predetermined, and some cult followers that have to do certain things. I think, just like from the way they first started up, especially the tutorial kind of portion. But for the most part, a lot of it's also randomly generated. So some of the surprise, for example, if you really gain a connection to a particular little cult follower, and they betray you, or they're unhappy, or they die, or whatever might happen, that could feel like a surprise that maybe wasn't even scripted. So I think, honestly, the biggest surprise for me is just that I'd not heard about it until it came out, essentially, when it seems so obviously a hit. Like it just has all the elements. It's, it seems interesting mechanically in different ways, and therefore would appeal to many people. And it's heckin' cute. It's just so cute. Like, you can't help but find it quirky and adorable and lovely. And if you do end up playing it, because I do think like some of the mechanics of it would be interesting as well. Like I said, the cynic in me, my only worry is that it's not quite hard enough or deep enough, that they've tried too many things. And I don't know how well each of them stands on its own, but maybe they don't have to. Maybe the fact that you have to juggle so many different things is enough, that even if one thing isn't deep on its own.
Like you said, the core loop might just be juggling all of these balls. And so it might be the exception to the rule of putting too many games into one game, where the whole idea is to juggle between these different loops or games or tactics. Yeah, it sounds really interesting. Does this game have a tutorial? Is there an actual tutorial separate from the game, or is it built into? Is the learning built into the game itself?
There isn't. So a lot of games these days, I don't really think that they do completely separate tutorials. But there is a clear, when you start the game, first of all, it really does drip feed you information. And it also doesn't add all of the mechanics at once either. So not just that it doesn't tell you everything, it will remove certain mechanics from the start of the game. So, in a very common trope of a lot of games, when you first start, you might not even have a health bar. Like it doesn't even matter if you get hit or, because you're not supposed to die there. Or, like many games do, they force you to die at a particular point to teach you about death and health and all of that. But what this game really did is they added on, like even your HUD, if you do play, elements get added as mechanics get added. Like they literally wouldn't be there. So, which is an interesting thing. One of the things I found interesting about it is in this game you do collect resources, but when you start, because they haven't taught you about it yet, even doing the actions that would normally give you a resource, it doesn't even give you the resource. Was an interesting design choice, because I knew, I had watched other people play the beginning of the game. I knew if I chop down grass, I'm supposed to get grass. But because there was no, like I wasn't even told that I had an inventory yet, the game doesn't let you do that in the tutorial sort of portion. But it doesn't tell you you're in a tutorial. I mean, we all know, we have the game language. I know, I'm in a tutorial. But it's very worked in, because it's like, this is the beginning of your, of your story, and you're building, right? You're starting small and building. So that beginning doesn't feel like a tutorial. And there's no clear end to it either, because there are constantly sort of new events or new things happening. And I don't even know yet. I think that I might have uncovered most of the core mechanics and loops, but there could, and I don't even know, there could, in fact, there are still certain things, like in a city builder, where certain buildings have certain actions that like are their own games and management systems. Because I haven't built those buildings yet, I haven't interfaced with those mechanics yet. So every time it feels more like those kind of tutorials where it pops up when you get something that now you can interact with in a different way. You get the little pop-up that says, now you can do this thing, this is how you do it, and I wouldn't say it's the best tutorial in terms of wowing me in any way. It's definitely unobtrusive, which is the best thing I can say about it. And I think they've done a good job of drip feeding the information so it's not overwhelming, and not giving too much on the screen for people to read at once. Because even though you and I will sit here and read every single word that it says, a lot of people will just skip through. And, I'm glad that they've tried to balance that to make sure that there isn't too much. People will just skip important information because they've laid it out with too much lore or too much fluff.
At the GDC Game Developers Conference back in 2014, someone named Asher Vollmer gave a talk about tutorials, and one thing he talked about in this conversation is, how do you get away from these long scrolls of text that nobody reads, first of all, but also understanding what a tutorial or education system is supposed to do. And so he identified three things. It's supposed to educate you, to show you the mechanics. It's also supposed to excite you, make you want to use those mechanics and show you why they're fun. But there's a third thing, which is to comfort you, to make you understand it's okay if you don't know this yet. It's okay if you die here. It's okay if you fail. It's okay if you don't understand the ramifications of all of these mechanics just yet. Do you think that Cult of the Lamb succeeds at educating, exciting, and comforting, or is it doing something a little bit different when it's showing you how to play?
I think it succeeds at all of those things. Very much so. Anytime there's a new mechanic, I think it's, especially in a game like this, it's small, relatively cheap, like under $30 game by, I think, a fairly indie dev, not somebody that I've heard of. I think it's made by Massive Monster, published by Devolver, and I really like Devolver games. But it does kind of make you go every time they introduce something new. The excitement is definitely there, because you're like, wow, this game even has fishing, or whatever it might be. And definitely educates, does a good job of that. And you said makes you feel like, okay, you don't have to, it's okay that you don't know things. It actually does that quite explicitly. Um, the one thing I'll say, and why it doesn't wow me, I have had some games that have wowed me with the way that they teach players. And the thing that's amazing about it is that you forget you're playing a game and that you don't even realize at all that there is a tutorial. It really is so seamlessly involved and into the actual way you play that, you know, the control scheme becomes just an extension of yourself in a way that feels very natural. And the game for me that did this probably the best, some of the best that I've seen right at the beginning, and it's been talked about before, but I'll have to bring it up again. It's Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight does a great job of this. And it's a pure, it does everything you said, but it also, it does that thing where you don't even know you're learning. So it will drop you into a situation, and when you first start the game and you just drop in, one of the first things that happens is, you know, you can just move left and right essentially. And they'll present an obstacle that most players will immediately overcome without even thinking. So like they present a door, you know, you just hit the button for attack, you break open the door. Like you don't even have to, you know, but if you don't succeed, because the next thing they do is they actually drop you into a pit to teach you that you can jump. And if you don't do the action on your own, after like some amount of time, it will prompt you with a tiny little overlay of the button you're supposed to press. Like it doesn't even say, it just, you know, and for most players, they won't even actually see that because they will just naturally have like tried the button that is usually the button for attack or jump or whatever and get through it. And I really liked that aspect. It also drip feeds. Hollow Knight also does the thing where it drip feeds sort of information and mechanics, and your HUD isn't complete until it teaches you about certain things. But I think it's really hard in these games that try to present a very beautiful and engaging world to then be like, press B2 to, you know, do this action. Like it can feel really bizarre. And I've seen games take that to an extreme where they purposefully break the fourth wall and make a joke of it, right? There are games where they'll be like, I don't know why, but I want to tell you now that left trigger makes you eat food. I don't know what I'm saying. Like there's been games I played where they'll do that because there's really no other way around it sometimes. And I think that that's a cute way to handle it too. I know Bastion broke the fourth wall a few times when it first came out, and the way that it talked through and the narrator interacted with the player. And there's a lot of games that try to also make fun of the fact that obviously there's not much we can do except tell you that on your controller there's a button you have to press to do this action.
Yeah, it's awkward, eh? Like I think when you and I talked about emulators many episodes ago, I brought up Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, which I've heard it's you know one of the highest rated video games of all time. If you look it up, it's like 10 out of 10 or 99% on its ratings. And I'd never played it. I had heard that title many, many times. And so I tried it out, not for long on an emulator. It was very awkward in playing it, but it does exactly that, where you have characters in the world telling you how to use a controller, which is not in their world. And it's immersion breaking, and it's awkward, and it doesn't work as well. And I think, obviously, it's 1998 that game was released, and games and how they're played and how they're designed and how we can educate people in playing them has evolved incredibly. And also, games are always educating you. Unlike other art forms, which can be immediately apparent or don't take too long to grapple with, a game up until the end, you're learning new ideas or new feats or new ways to play, new mechanics, new ways to beat the boss. If you're not learning that stuff, I imagine a lot of games would become boring or chore-like. Or you are an athlete playing it over and over and over again, like an art historian looking at paintings in a gallery. Like you're not learning about what an orange means anymore, but you're looking at the brushstrokes and understanding how that orange is exactly painted on the canvas. I also wanted to bring up, you mentioned it earlier in this episode, games that put the tutorial and the story together into one. So Disco Elysium is a good example of this, where the whole story is not just you learning how to play, but the person you're playing learning how to play in this world, understanding who the hell he is. And right up until the end of the game, he's still figuring himself out and trying to pick himself up out of his dismay and despair. And so when you have that unity, you easily forget that you're in a game and you're supposed to be learning about a game. Does Cult of the Lamb do that? Does it make you forget that you're learning, or are you always kind of conscious? Like, for example, Slay the Spire, which we talked about many times now. I'm always conscious that I'm learning the mechanics. I'm never kind of swept up into the world and forgetting that I'm learning. Where does Cult of the Lamb fit on this spectrum?
I think that I'm not super swept up yet, but that might be a me thing. Like I said, where I try to over optimize everything. I'm a little sad that I feel myself rushing a little bit. I feel myself, okay, click, talk to all the, all the cult followers so that you get their loyalty up. And it has that XCOM thing, right? Where you can name the followers. So you can try to make them all your friends' names and your family and whatever. And, additionally, this is a cult. You might have to kill some people. So you can put your enemies in there. And at first I thought that I would have a lot of fun with that, but quickly became more enamored with the mechanics and kind of left that role-playing aspect a bit more out of it and just clicked through those actions and just let the default random roll of who I was going to get be. And I think and I hope that those kinds of aspects will continue to have the game have longevity if I play it again, or even within the same save file potentially, depending on how it goes. That once I get a handle on the mechanics that now I'm so excited about, like you said, all the things that are exciting, the new things that I'm trying to learn, and that maybe later it'll be more specifically engaging in terms of actually feeling like I am dealing with all of these different characters. But it's very mechanics heavy, and I think that the more mechanics heavy a game is, the less likely you are to forget that you're trying to actually be good at a thing. You're not necessarily inside a world specifically.
Yeah, totally. And that makes sense. And I don't take away from those games when they're like that. It's just a different kind of experience than one that is trying to make you forget that you're playing a game, enjoy the experience, and there are mechanics, but that's almost part of the story, part of the learning in deep. We're going to keep this conversation brief, so we're going to finish up soon. Is there something about the game that you are really excited to get back into because you haven't explored enough? Like, what's one aspect of Cult of the Lamb that you want to dig into because it's just so fresh?
Oh man, the tech tree. Like there's so much, and there's multiple different tech trees. So, I kind of just I spent, like I said, a couple hours doing straight, essentially tech tree exploration, and finally re-educated my dissenter. So I had been sticking around the cult. I hadn't been going off to dungeon crawl because I didn't want, my cult to get out of hand. And so on the one hand, I'm excited to head back out and dungeon crawl and explore a little bit more. I just narrowly didn't kill the first boss. And so just to see what's after that, because I essentially haven't seen almost anything in the next zone or like what comes after that part of the dungeon. But there's still the part of me that enjoys. I know I enjoy the more like the city builder and the colony sim aspect probably a little bit more. And there's excitement in just, ooh, what's this building? Ooh, what does this decoration look like? Ooh, what all of this, and it's almost too much. Like it's like that kid who gets too many presents on Christmas morning and kind of goes, oh, another gift, oh, another gift. Like I said, I'm playing it maybe a little fast. I should slow my roll. But I also specifically chose a fairly difficult difficulty setting for me. I went not quite at the extra hard, though I could probably even do that. I went for hard, which I don't normally do. I typically stick to like normal, medium, whatever, developer recommended. But I had watched other streamers play, and I have to say it's tuned a bit easy. And I still find I don't know if I'm being punished enough in the game. So maybe that's why it's going too fast. Maybe I need to actually make it even harder. so that I feel like it forces me to slow down because I'm failing at the things I'm trying to do.
That should be the subtitle of your memoir. I don't think I'm being punished enough. When I play a game the first time, as easy as it can be, like cadet mode, story mode, like don't no, I want to be invincible. I want to just learn. I'm too scared. And I just can't imagine starting up a game for the first time and going, yeah, give me hard. I'll take it hard. Like I guess it's maybe different if you've watched people play. That makes sense. When we didn't talk too much about tutorials, we talked about it a little bit in relation to Cult of the Lamb. Is there stuff you wanted to talk about in terms of tutorials in this session that we left uncovered?
Yeah, I think there's still a little bit more we can talk about. Um, I wanted to dig in a little bit more. We talked before about previous experience in gaming and how that could be used in tutorials. And, maybe discussing a little bit about whether we think that's good or bad. Does it alienate new players? Because coming back to Cult of the Lamb, that's really, to me, I didn't even think of the tutorial because, like I said, I was taking past experience for almost every new mechanic. I was like, oh, this is like that, and immediately understood what they were getting at. So, you know, maybe delving a little bit into that. And I want to hear more about what games you've played where you've either really liked or really hated the tutorial from. And who knows, maybe by next time we talk, you actually play a little bit of Cult of the Lamb and you could dig into what you think. And I think it's, I also usually start playing games easy. I think they could have made the game harder. And I think this is, again, the cynic in me is a little worried that it might get too boring. And, if a game is too easy and it doesn't, if you realize that there's no consequences for your action, I think it's very easy to go, well, what am I doing? So I wonder if you do end up playing, what you will think of the difficulty and the way that they present all of the different aspects.
That is often how I feel in a tutorial level. Like it might not be a separate tutorial, but it's an area of the game that is clearly meant to educate, and it can be cumbersome and unnecessary. I'm just thinking, okay, I think I figured this out. I'd like to move on to the next bit, or I just need the learning to go a little bit faster because I've played games like this before. So it's hard though because that's calibrating a game to different levels of experience. Maybe what we need is different types of tutorials embedded into the game. And you can kind of select what's necessary for you. Or, there's different examples of this. Crusader Kings 3 is a good example of a game where the tutorial is built in all of the tooltips that are, I guess, infinitely magnified. So in one tooltip, you'll have a bunch of things that are listed and everything is highlighted with a hyperlink. You can just mouse over that. It'll give you another toolbox and another and another and another, which can become immense on the screen. But what it means is that everything is accessible to you, and you don't have to remember, oh, I got to look up what a duchy is versus a county or something like that. You can see it right in front of you. And so to have the encyclopedia of the game, which is really the tutorial for a game like Crusader Kings, embedded like that is really helpful. But I don't know if the same thing would be applicable to a game like a roguelike, like Cult of the Lamb or other games. Okay. Anything else that you wish we'd talked about, like doesn't maybe not related to tutorials, or that we did talk about but you want to talk about more?
Well, we said we would talk a little bit about manuals as well, and the old way that a lot of learning was handled too. You just kind of brought it up. Now the manuals are inside the game, but they used to also be printed, something you purchased. So that would be, there's still a lot I think to dig into there. Um, yeah, I think there's a couple of things I would have wanted to still talk about, um, especially when it comes to, we brought this up as well, how developers deal with the games as they age as well. So a game now like Cult of the Lamb, they actually can provide updates based on the feedback they get as people. So it'll be interesting to see too how things evolve and tutorials change after people have been playing it for a while.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've got our next subject. We'll see you next time.